Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Now, welcome to
Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Andy Littleton. I'm with Mission Church, and the laughing pastor is Eric Siepen from the Village. Eric, good to be with you this morning.
Yeah, it was really good to be with you. We chatted about would Jesus protest?
Yep.
And what would he protest? And a particular one here locally with Bookman's.
Yep. So we hope you enjoy. I'm sure as a Tucsonan, this may have been on your radar. If not, there's, I'm sure, a lot of parallel situations you can consider as you listen in. So, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Enjoy the conversation.
Enjoy. Hey,
Amen.
Andy. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while.
Did you know what? Yeah, it's been a while. We'll chat about a while.
Yeah. Oh, will we? I listened to the one with you and Michael, and I thought, that was great.
I'm not needed.
Yeah, I could just move on with my life.
That's not true. So
Eric's like, I'm never letting you move on with your
can
life.
never move on. You're stuck with me. I'm controlling.
I feel like God says the same thing to me.
Yeah.
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 Except
I'm kind of a physical representation of him for you.
Oh no.
Oh no. We've gone down.
Yeah, actually I did. That's a joke. I don't feel like God is controlling, wouldn't be the word I would say. But I do feel like sometimes God says, you know that thing you want to get out of? No. I'm here with you. Yeah. I'm here with you in it, and we're gonna just keep doing this.
Yeah.
So in that sense, this podcast is a parallel to my experience with Jesus.
All right, so this is odd for us. I mean, other than when we did your book, and we've done a few other things that have a local kind of thing to it, but this is local. We're going to talk about one, maybe two things that are happening locally.
That's right.
In Tucson. Which
I was asked, by the way, if we were going to say any more about the book leading into Good Friday and Easter.
Well, that's a great idea.
And so I will just say a little something. Let's
say a little something.
Yeah. First of all, Saturday, 11 o'clock, I will have a stack of these books over at Gospel Supplies, the bookstore,
Sweet.
As well as my other two books. And I'll be selling them there.
You're such an accomplished author.
No, this is what happens when you used to work somewhere and they take pity on you.
Yeah, well, that's hey, it's all about connections.
Yeah, no, it is. And actually, it's not just pity. They'll feature local authors if you ask, if they think the book's okay.
Yeah,
and so I'm really honored that they're doing it on a big weekend for them. You know, it's Easter weekend. A lot of people will probably come through. They're thinking about Jesus. And so what we do with Jesus is the book. It's about the Garden of Gethsemane. It's about our Good Friday service last year. It's about, especially though, me asking questions out of the life of Felix Lucero, the author who made the Garden of Gethsemane in downtown Tucson. So, if you're interested in that book, it is on Amazon, What We Do with Jesus. And if you throw my last name on the end of it, it'll pop up even faster.
Yeah.
And Littleton.
That would be Andy Littleton.
That's right. But also, Saturday, 11, I will be at Gospel Supplies. And, I'll sign a copy. I will refrain if you don't want that.
And if you go and you heard about him here on the podcast, you can say, hey, I listened to you on Faith Over Breakfast.
And I'll say, what?
What?
Whoa.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And then he'll say, something nice about Faith Over Breakfast in your book.
Oh, I could.
Yeah.
I really could.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, all that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah. I'll be over there with that book, What We Do with Jesus, The Little Man, and Part-Time Pastoring, which is about bivocationalism. So I'd love to see you. And are you guys doing a Good Friday and Easter thing? Is there anything you want to say about that? Because people might listen to this right before.
Yeah, we're not doing a Good Friday thing this year.
Friday? Okay.
But we are. I think some people have been talking to me about doing Good Friday next year.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take a little bit of planning to make it happen.
Sure. You mentioned that we could think about collaborating.
Yes.
Think about that. Our original venue fell through, so that's part of why I didn't get back to you. But we are having Good Friday, 7 p.m. at Bike Church. So this is a art sculpture on the edge of the Barrio Anita neighborhood off of Granada.
Okay.
It's kind of a cool place. It has an interesting story. Cyclovia is coming up right after. So I'm actually really excited about all the tie-ins there. So Bike Church was built to remember people who died riding their bikes. It's not supposed to be a specifically Christian art install, but it ties in Christian and Jewish symbolism as well as some others. But we are going to go there and think about what it means that Jesus died on the cross in light of that issue of people dying in accidents. And so, yeah. And actually, the more I think about it this week, the more meaningful it gets. So 7 p.m. Friday, you're all welcome. And then for us, Easter Sunday is same time, 4:30. And we have our Feaster potluck, which means, as we say, bring your Easter leftovers, and
you have a feaster,
and then we'll have a feaster.
That's interesting.
And so share them with your friends at our church after church. So yeah, we'll be talking about the book of Revelation.
That is pretty interesting. So we also obviously have 2 Easter services, morning and evening. We're going to have 12 people baptized.
Whoa.
It's kind of crazy.
That is crazy.
I want to say that because we do baptisms on Easter. Other times we do them, but we really, love Easter as a baptism time.
That's sweet.
And I thought, I don't think there's a lot of people who want to get baptized.
Man, that's a good reminder for me, because I'm sure there are people in our church who want to, haven't brought it up. But if we said, hey, do this.
Yeah, so that's cool that there's going to be 12. We're going to have, for the first time, some in the evening, because usually most of our baptisms are in the morning, because people, that's a very traditional Easter moment.
Bathe yourself in the morning.
Yeah,
usually.
Yeah. And so we do a soup supper, so everybody brings soup, bread, or dessert.
Yeah,
and
there you go.
Yeah, so come at 10 a.m. or 5 p.m.
There you go. Okay, that's what's
happening.
That's what's happening
now
this
that
week.
You've sorted through that and you keep hitting the 15-second forward. Here we are.
Well, I think that was relevant information.
I think it was too.
So, okay, you threw out a topic, which was that there was a protest scheduled.
Yes.
Here in Tucson, on the northwest side, by a church called The Bridge.
Yes.
This is something you can look up on. I mean, this was in the news, and the news is Instagrams, and that church is, it's public info.
Yeah.
You wanted to talk about it. And as is true of A Faith Over Breakfast, I don't know your angle on this at all, and you don't know mine.
No, so this
are
could be really interesting.
Just sitting down at the table. Imagine there's a big stack of eggs and, I don't know, corned beef hash.
Right.
And
corned beef hash
of toast.
Well, I'm not a corned beef guy, but because you served that to me, I'm going to eat it.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me. Yeah. I love corned beef hash, so I love to offer things that I love, but I don't like when it comes out of a can.
No. I will not eat corned beef out of a can.
Yeah, I go ahead and skip it.
Yeah.
So,
So let's set the stage real quick.
Set the stage.
And Bookman's, which is a very popular bookstore, and there are, I think, 3 of them in town. Or there are 4.
Something like that.
Anyway, they're used books and games and sporting stuff, and it's a really cool place.
Oh, it's a place that Tucsonans love, me included.
Yes, we all love to go there. I've gotten tons of books there, gotten tons of games and different stuff.
Right.
They also do things for kids like story hours and stuff like that, and they, I think, have had for a while, actually, a drag story hour. So men or women dressing up as men or women, the opposite sex there, in the makeup and everything, and then telling, reading stories to children.
Right.
You don't have to go to this. You can bring your children. You don't have to bring your children, but this is what they do. It's scheduled. And Bridge Church, I think the one that would be on the northeast side, but maybe the one on the northwest side. I'm not sure which, because they have a couple locations too.
Oh yeah, I would guess it'd be northwest is closer to the Bookmans, but
I'm not sure.
Maybe together.
But they invited their community to. So I'm assuming this comes from others. This comes from the leadership of the church to go protest this. And according to the news article, Bookmans themselves were getting word that different kinds of groups may be showing up.
Proud Boys
might have to have some maybe nefarious intentions, or things might get violent. Also, they were concerned about just having that many people in the Bookman space.
Sure.
Because they couldn't, the people were going to come occupy all the chairs, things like that. So there was going to be this protest.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we want to talk about is how do we feel about that?
Right.
But I also want to set the stage that, you and I probably theologically don't line up completely with the Bridge Church and some of their theology, but they are our brothers and sisters in Christ. So
yeah, needs to be said.
When we talk about this, we want to be very careful to honor them in that, but also we may disagree with some things. So
yeah. And I was going to say, on top of that, like, the way that I first heard about it was somebody that I would consider a friend shared it because they go to the Bridge.
Right.
So that's how I first heard about it. And someone I care about, I believe that they believe in Jesus. I believe that they want to do what's right.
Right.
And I love them. And so that's how I heard about it.
Right.
And we've had a number of people, actually not anymore, but early on in the days of our church, there was a little cadre of former Bridge people back when the Bridge was called something else here. It used to be called the Cool Church.
The Cool Church.
And all of these people are people that I care about, and I think that some of them were with us because they had different thoughts and views, but not always.
Yeah.
They're the Bridge in their lives and the lives of many other people has been, for as much as I may not always agree with the Bridge, they do indeed meet people, tend to lead people to Jesus, and can be a formative community in people's lives. And then I have noticed that sometimes people, after a while, realize they need to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But not always.
No.
Yeah.
So with that stage laid,
can we give just a tad bit of background on our thoughts on or recollections of the journey of the Bridge? It's a unique church here in town, and I'll bet if people listening here or elsewhere had a little info, they might recognize there's churches like that I know that.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I know, and then you can, in my experience of that. I mean, most people's experiences, you probably see either the commercials on TV or the billboards that say something basically about
bored question mark,
and so it's this idea of churches and their pastor is very flamboyant looking, like bleached blonde hair, and
he's very
flamboyant,
early 2000s hip dude, who's now
older,
late 50s.
Yeah. He's about my age,
and that's not being mean to him. That's just legitimately
he's older than me, but
that's not even a joke. Dude kind of found a lane, and he
wrote it.
He's still writing it. Yeah. When I first moved to Tucson, they met in the Foothills Mall.
Okay.
And it was an interesting, that mall, that's a whole nother podcast.
Right.
It's getting torn down partially right now. But that mall has been dead, and then it would come back. And this was during a dead zone of it. There were very few things going on, and one thing going on, and it was the Cool Church. And you'd hear these TV ads, and it was always, to me, I struggled with it even as a young person who was in the church, because it felt very much like I was being sold a used car.
Right.
That's honestly how I felt. It felt kind of like the Premier Auto Sales, Scott Lehman approach of being very in your face, and this is going to be awesome. And so I've never really responded well to that type of marketing, just in general.
Yeah.
But clearly, a lot of people do, because they met and engaged a lot of people, a lot of whom I would get to know later.
Yeah.
So as I throughout the years got more embedded in the Christian church and working in the bookstore and stuff, I engaged with the leaders there in those times, and a big takeaway I have on them from a little bit of personal engagement and a lot of reflection is they kind of do things by themselves.
Yeah, they are definitely.
There's not collaboration.
No.
There's not a denomination. They don't do the
they
joint.
are Nazarene, but yeah.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
they do not seem to participate with other churches in town or like build relationships or hear like feedback per se or give feedback to others. They're doing their thing.
Yeah, they're doing their thing.
Yeah. And then, one of the early things I learned was that they were putting out a lot of like a kind of a major campaign and a lot of literature against Calvinists.
Yes,
which is what I happen to now be. I wasn't at the time.
Right.
When that was first happening.
Yeah.
But they, in that sense, like took on a large group of Christians and really put a lot of time and effort into, trying to show that was flawed and bad and, didn't lead to good living and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a few.
Yeah, there's a little bit of background on who they
tidbits.
are.
Any more to add to that?
Not really. No. I mean,
was any of that wrong? I think.
I don't. That's all I know. Really.
Yeah. Okay.
Those are.
I don't mean to. That's just honest reflections.
That's who they are. So they organize a protest. Bookman's actually at this point has shut down the story hour. They're talking about rescheduling it.
Yeah.
But it's all up in the air. So let's talk about not necessarily do we think what they did was right and wrong, but what do you think a biblical, godly approach to something like this? Mm-hmm. And how do we kind of as Christians engage the culture and see things like this which aren't healthy for sure, at least in my mind.
Right.
And so what do we do with that and how do we engage as people?
Well, so this was my question, WWJP. Who would Jesus protest?
Who would Jesus protest? That's a great question.
Yeah, and then that leads into questions about what is protesting,
right?
What's it for?
Okay.
And then how would a Christian use it, right?
Yeah.
So, but then there's different. Anyway, let's go down that line of thought. Who would Jesus protest?
Well, that's a really hard one. Who would Jesus protest?
Would Jesus protest is a good question, too.
Yeah. Well, I think I want to start with a comment from someone from Jessica, my admin, who actually asked me, and she texted me after I'd seen it already, the protest was happening. I said, hey, you guys need to talk about this on Faith Over Breakfast.
Yeah.
And as I talked to her a little bit more, she was like, the question she was asking is, where is Jesus? And where would Jesus be during the protest?
Sure.
And I think that, to me...
Similar question. But, yeah, putting him... He's either in the middle of it or adjacent to it. Would he be and why? Or why not?
Right.
Yeah. And then there's another question we could ask at some point, which would be, did this protest work? Because they put out an announcement, we did it.
Yes.
So in their minds, it worked.
It shut it down.
And so what do we mean by success? I think it's very complicated.
Yeah.
I'm actually really not. I don't have these crystal clear.
Well, can we go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here for a second?
I'd love that.
And say that you and I live in a pluralistic society.
This is true.
That means that I want people's opportunities to express themselves to be protected because I want my own faith to be protected and the expression of it.
Well, right? That gets into another little layer I had. It was our understanding of our political situation, which I think also might differ from folks at the Bridge. Right.
And so for me personally, and I'm not saying I have hey, this is where I come down on this, but I have a choice. Mm-hmm. I know when this hour is going on. I don't have to go to Bookman's. Right. But I don't want everything that I disagree with and see as destructive in society. If I'm consistently protesting it, then I feel like I am not actually addressing the gospel and the loving, caring for people. I'm simply playing referee to everything that's going on in society. And I think it's very dangerous to be the referee because referees don't necessarily get a hearing and they're not cared about. They're only, if you're on their side, right, then they're really excited. If they're on, if you're not on their side, then you're the enemy.
So it's really an interesting thing here where like, so let me think. So protesting to me is a political move.
It is political.
It's, right? It's not necessarily a Christian or religious. It's not built into our Bible. It's not built into our way of being as God's people. Okay, that doesn't mean it's invalid. It's a political invention that you can use. It usually is one that you would use when the political system is not working, listening, or doing an injustice that can only be addressed by kind of a group stance against it or a resistance to something that you're being asked to do that is wrong. A lot of times somebody would protest when they feel like a group decision has been, so say like the atomic bomb is about to be launched on behalf of us all, using all of our tax dollars.
Right.
And a group of people says, we think this is morally wrong.
Right.
And you would go and stand in the way of the operators of the bomb getting to shoot the bomb off in that situation. Because you would say, I will disobey because I believe that what we are doing collectively is wrong. That's a part of why the idea of protest, I think it's an invention that's probably been around in some way, shape, or form forever. So it's civil disobedience.
Can we? I think it's good. Can we give it let me just give a little bit of a biblical structure of how to engage government and what Bible says.
Yes.
So in particular in Romans, but there's other sections, we're called to submit to the authorities. But in Revelation, it's very clear that behind all authorities is Satan. So
and over them is God,
right? But
technically,
all governments have a demonic, and all government leaders have a demonic backing. And yet we are also at the same time called to submit to them. But it's very clear that from Paul and Paul's actions as a Roman citizen that he utilizes the law in order for the gospel to go forward.
Right.
And I think that sets a precedent not just in the preaching of the gospel, but the practice of the gospel within the law. So when you look at slavery or you look at Jim Crow or you look at any place where human dignity is being taken away by the government.
Right.
I don't believe that anywhere, I don't think I, as a Christian, can justify violence, revolution.
Right.
Like violent revolution anyway.
I'm for nonviolent protest in certain cases.
But I can stand with the oppressed because I think where Jesus is going to be is with the oppressed, with those who are downtrodden, not with the oppressor. In particular, when human dignity and the image of God is being damaged or taken away or killed. Yeah. This is kind of where I think of that. So when I think about protesting against a business...
Well, that becomes... That's what I was going to bring up. So protest is a political move. But again, the Bible doesn't necessarily spell out how to do it because it is not a biblical... invention.
Right.
It is a political invention that we have at our disposal as Paul uses the Roman government's things to his disposal. So I don't think I'm not saying a Christian can't do it or use it. This is actually very much in the thinking right now because after the protests surrounding George Floyd, some of the response of actually like your more right or far right leaning Christians has been to actually, there have been books that have come out, Doug Wilson and others, who are saying, okay, we need to adopt the methodologies of the radical left, such as Saul Alinsky and others who led worker movements, and use their methods that they're using on us against them. And that's the method of protest and resistance.
Right.
And so that's, in a weird way, there's a lot of that. Like kind of you look at our two aisles of politics right now, and they're essentially just resisting each other constantly.
Yeah.
And the public is being encouraged on both the right and the left to utilize this. It's very much the trending way to operate.
Yeah.
And I think protesting is losing its power in this. Why? because it used to be rare. It used to be that it was brought out. It was a card you played in a very serious situation. I think of MLK. I think of some of the protests, around nuclear weapons. Now it feels like there's some kind of protest about everything.
Right.
But as you bring up, it's what is it? How does it come into play with a business who's operating under a legally protected status that actually we operate under, as like if your Christian business, Gospel Supplies, operates under that same protection, that they can be
right
motivated and by a certain mindset or religion, and they can exercise it as long as it is built into, as far as I understand, their business model.
Right.
So an interesting thing about Bookman's is one of their things they've been about forever
is no censorship.
No censorship. And I remember the tables when I was a kid, they would have the censored books, and they would always have Bibles on there saying these should not be censored.
Right.
And I remember even when I was young kind of going, oh, interesting. Like they're fighting for that for everybody as a business, not as a, that's an interesting fact. But that is a big thing. They have shirts about it. And so they are operating out of that as a business. They always have.
Yeah.
They're allowed to. And it feels like the protest should be either you should go protest the law, which actually would be troublesome to you as a Christian.
Yeah.
Or if they're doing something that's not forbidden by the law, I have questions about if this is a right protest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in thinking about all of this, I think about it as consumerism is a religion, Bookman's is a temple. And so,
but they're not legally such.
But what I mean when we think of this from a mission perspective, and so this is just Ephesus, full of temples, full of temple worship, full of temple things. It's a part of our life and engage it. So the question is, how, as a Christian who is a missionary, wanting to bring the gospel forward, how do I do that?
So if you're Paul and you walk into Bookman's, which is like a Mars Hill, which exhibits all types of gods, and it does, right? Bookman's forever held on to having the pornography corner. I don't know if they still do.
No, because it's not legal, but yeah.
Yeah, but they have done that, right? Like they were like, we're going to have it all.
Yeah, we're going to have it all. Here's what I think, and I've thought a lot about it. I think there are two things that I think Jesus would do, and I would ask the question, what would Paul do? Because I think I think Paul would sit down at the drag hour, children's story hour, and sit there and listen, and Paul would get to know people. And Paul would begin to look for the gospel in what was being said and begin to invite people through friendship and engagement into a relationship with Jesus.
And to the unknown God that they were searching for or something. Sure.
I think he would engage people that way. I think.
Now, what about that's Paul, but maybe somebody you might say, but my child cannot discern that.
Well, don't bring your child.
So you have the choice of you cannot support that or the whole business.
You don't have to support the business. I mean, I think that is an individual thing that you can think about. And I actually don't think it would be a problem for a church, for like, say, the village. The village is like, hey, we are more and more concerned about the temple worship, so to speak, that's happening at Bookman's, and that more and more of us are there, and that it's actually dangerous for our children and it's dangerous for our community. So we're asking that you boycott Bookman's. You don't go there and give them your money.
Right.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I think that's what you do as a leader, as shepherding your people. But as a missionary, where are the people who don't know Jesus? They're at the drag, queen story hour. And so
I think this is an important distinction, like what role you have from God, like when you think of like apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher sort of stuff. Like recently Jackie Hill Perry put up something about the newer music and music videos of Beyonce and how she was like, I thought this was just kind of hearsay, but it is actually getting explicitly, it's a cult. Like she is leaning into a cult specifically. And she like labeled all this stuff. She's like, I hate this because I love Beyonce. I like her music, but I can't participate in it anymore because she's teaching me to worship another God.
Right.
But she actually said now, she was like, so I will not be listening or attending concerts or anything like that of Beyonce anymore. And then she said, but I have some friends who are going to continue to engage with her, who know her, who are Christians, because they are missionaries.
Yeah.
And evangelists. And she was like, so because I'm not, my role is to lead the church, I will not be there. I will not do that. They are going to be there not to celebrate what she's doing, but to stay in the midst of those conversations. And they don't think it's the best idea to just vacate those relationships.
Yeah.
And I thought that's really helpful to say. I think we see that in the early church. Not every leader did that. Paul did it. Not every leader did it. And it's good to know what your calling is, right? Protest is still a whole other question, but that is important.
Yeah, no, I think, and just last comment on this, because I think it's important to articulate ways of engaging. When I talked to Jessica, one of the examples that she gave that just really struck me, and I had a visual of this, is that her question about where was Jesus, and would Jesus be simply sitting in a chair quietly praying? And I think that is powerful if you're called into it and you sit there. This is a dark place, but I mean, when you walk into Bookman's, I only have a certain length of tolerance that I can be there, just because of how dark that place is. There's a lot going on, from witchcraft to all that kind of stuff.
They put it all in there.
Yeah, and so sitting there, knowing that you're bringing the presence of the Holy Spirit, praying for the people that walk by, praying for the kids who are listening, praying for the men who are dressed like women, like all that, praying about that's a protest. To me, that's a protest, because you're actually saying, you know what, these people, they're not the conflict. The conflict is the spirits behind all of this. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to war. And I think that's what we're called into. That's the kind of protest I'm like, yes, I will be part of.
So another question you're getting very like spiritual layer here. So I
am very spiritual layer.
I know. No, which is good. But I have an assumption that if you were to drill down on our maybe views of the biblical role of the church and the state between ourselves and the leaders of the bridge, there would be a lot of difference.
There would be.
So, and I think that people need to understand that. So when you see a Christian doing something and you think, why are they doing that? I wouldn't do that. It's good to ask, like, what have they been taught? What is their framework for the state and the church and the role of them? Because they're probably acting out of something they believe is the right thing to do based on their framework, right?
Yes.
And not all Christians agree on these things. There's actually a lot of difference. And, I wish we did. That'd be easier, but we don't. So if you had to guess what the government of the United States of America, of the state of Arizona, of Tucson, Arizona, of Marana, what they are supposed to do in regard to the Bible and godly things in the mind of the bridge, what would you guess?
Well, my guess is that there is the hope that it would be more and more integrated into what the government does.
Right.
And that it would hold to what is believed and has some validity, that the United States has its roots in a Judeo-Christian ethic, and it puts on its money in God we trust. And so it's made a special proclamation as a government and as a larger community that they worship one God, and that's the Christian God.
And I would go further than that just a little bit and say that I think the bridge, as a lot of other churches as well, would say not only did Americans do that at a certain point of time, but that it was God's will that America would do that. That America is a Christian nation that has a specific role in redemptive history, that is being lost right now because of free will, but should and could come back and be a major influence in the world to achieve the ends as described in the book of Revelation.
Yes, and I think that there's a belief that there is a special protection for the United States, that God has is removing from us because of our movement away from him.
Yeah. In missionary, the way missionaries talk, I remember hearing this years back in a missions class, and they said every single nation is ethnocentric. They believe that their nation is at the center of the plan and purpose of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
This is an ethnocentric view of America, which happens to be the biggest world power, so that makes it really serious.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an ethnocentric view that puts America at the center of redemptive history.
Yeah.
And it's unique to being an American.
It is.
And not all Americans share it, but it's very easy to believe because it puts your people at the center of the will of God at this time.
Right.
At this time.
Yeah.
There's like Israel was the big thing, now us.
Right.
It's like there's two chapters of redemptive history in God's mind, the Israel version, the America version, and they're kind of connected.
Yeah.
Talk to some people from, I don't know, Switzerland. They probably aren't going to see it that way.
Right.
Yeah. So worldwide, this is not a Christian view.
Right.
But here it is.
Yeah.
I think that, so then maybe work out your basic understanding of like, what's the relationship of Christianity to the government of our country, state, city.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think first it's hard to deny that the United States doesn't have a Judeo-Christian stream, a very strong stream flowing through it from the very beginning. It also has a very Lockean view, and so there's a lot going on.
There's a lot
happening.
We have to remind ourselves, obviously, that this country was inhabited by a lot of people before the whites and others showed up. But when that large migration of folks came over, it was just post-Reformation, and most of these people were Christians running away from the idea of the state church.
Yes.
And wanting to have a freedom of religion that they assumed would be mostly Christian.
Yes.
Yeah.
And had I would say a very ethnocentric view of itself and being white.
They very manifest destiny and that placing themselves as like reliving the Exodus narratives.
Yes.
Like specifically, which isn't unique. The black church felt that way during slavery. Like that's a useful narrative.
Yeah.
And it does repeat to some degree, but maybe it was assumed that it was utterly unique to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I would argue that the strong influence of Christianity within the United States has made it prosperous, has forced it to deal with a lot of its sins.
Yeah.
And certainly, and I don't mean this from, I'm so happy to be American.
Right.
There's a lot of freedom that a lot of other people don't have.
There's a lot of good things.
And why we're in this conversation about protest is partly because of Christianity.
Yeah.
It's because we're looking around saying, well, we want to do what is good and right. That's still stuck in our identity. Now, we may have lost or are struggling or don't have a collective view of what is right, but we still want what is right.
Well, and protest is this idea that like the minority voice or the smaller voice still has value, which gets back to image of God, theology.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of borrowed capital, even in our secular society that has Christian roots, and without those Christian roots, it would never be.
Right.
Yeah, such as the dignity of human life and the dignity of the oppressed and the downtrodden, which is like every protest, even in this case, the bridge. I think so many Christians are adopting the protest mindset because they're feeling like they're in the minority, which is new, relatively new. Yeah. And that is what that all comes from, that idea that you are not unvaluable just because you're small.
Yeah. And I think one of the hard parts, and I think this is where I would say the traditional evangelical Christian is finding themselves is in a place where they feel a little disenfranchised, and because the culture has shifted. Yeah. And so now we live in, I would argue, a more pagan culture where our voice doesn't hold, Christians in general don't hold the same power, because we don't have as many people saying things, and also there are more voices now speaking about life and what's good and right and all that kind of stuff, and so we don't know necessarily how to operate as missionaries in our own culture. And even though, like, since the 70s, we've been trying to talk about what it means to be a missionary in a secular culture, we just don't know how to do it. We have not trained and discipled our churches to do that. And so we're kind of scrambling, I think, to learn to be missionaries in an ever-increasing pagan culture where atheism is now one of the fastest growing, quote-unquote, religions. The movement of the nuns, meaning having no religion at all, is. And so I think we see things like the Bridge, trying to figure this out. I think that's what they're doing. They're trying to figure out how to operate in a secularized culture where what they didn't see as a temple, they saw as a bookstore, is now a temple to many, gods. But I think some of it was you walk into Bookman's, you're a little apathetic, right? You're just like, okay, well, yes, they represent everybody.
Right.
But oh no, now they're doing children's hour to
and they're not doing a Christian children's hour, which I think Bookman should face too. Like,
oh, they would if I suspect if we asked.
Yeah,
and that's the other thing.
That's the other side, is like, maybe you go, okay, if everything's welcome here, then can I do this? And they need to grapple with that. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, and I think that might be a move that I hadn't really thought of. That would be a very, I think, actually be interesting.
And then you could say, hey, we got denied.
Yeah.
What's up with that? And that is a valid question. Like, if censorship's not a thing, then prove it, Bookman's. Like, so the, I'll just say, for me, like, and this is going to be way too short of an explanation, but I'm kind of Augustinian in my thinking on our relationship to the state. And what I mean by that is Augustine saw and believed, and he's, one of our early, really, a lot of Western civilization was formed around his theology and his thinking about the church and the state. But that there's he wrote the book City of God, and the idea is there's the city of man ruled by the enemy, the city of God, and it's not cleanly sorted. They're always intermingled. And actually that makes a lot of sense of the history of Israel, because you look back at Israel and it's not this like clean, great history. And it turns out that not everybody in there had the faith of Abraham, and there's a lot of judgment. So they're not just the chosen people. They're chosen, but intermixed into them is still this dark reality. Yeah. Right. So there are people who come to faith from outside of it, the Rahabs and whatnot. So all of a sudden the city of God has influence outside of Israel, and people are coming in. And Augustine sees that same reality carrying all across history and all across Scripture. So the church, God's true church, is the city of God, and intermixed into it are all sorts of people who don't really belong to it. And then around us and all of the various forms of government is the city of man, and within it are people who truly belong to the city of God, whose eyes haven't been opened yet, and so on. So he talks about, actually, Augustine maybe kind of created what the word secularism for us, because he talked about how the only way to live is that the city of God is living amongst and organizing within the city of man. Like, we live in communities, and we do, a lot of times some of our education, and we have to drive together. So we have to have rules of the road together. And right. And we have to, so we have to ask, how do we live within secularism in a way that, how do people of the city of God live in harmony with the rest of the world in our shared life? And then how do we govern ourselves separately as God's people as well? So I believe the church is where God's people are governed, and that we are not to expect the state to do the job of the church. Now, the Christian is still going to have moral convictions and things that the state ought to do that's in its best interests, that will disagree with somebody that's not from within it, and they should represent that view, and they should try to go for it. Like, great. There are great examples all throughout history of things that Christians advocated for that were right and good and true. But they did it in such a way that you can't just read the Bible to somebody and prove it. You have to show this is best for us,
right,
and advocate for that. So that's the political viewpoint I'm coming from that differs. So I would not necessarily think that I could hold over another business or even a government a specifically Christian view on a thing. I think I could advocate for it, but I don't. And then the question of what's protest for comes in, and is this a good moment or a right moment for protest or not? So that's probably a whole other podcast.
Yeah, no. And
does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's really good.
Yeah. So, because I've got to go in 5.
Yep.
Did the protest work?
Did the protest work? Well, I don't know, because
it stopped the event.
It stopped the event, but they're still trying to figure out how they're going to plan it.
And I guess, like, my question would be, what's working in our eyes?
The hard part for me was Jesus lifted up and worshipped and cared about. And did people who did not know Jesus, were they drawn closer to Jesus? And that would be in particular for this kind of protest, I would hope would happen. So however you're going to go about this, you want people to be drawn to Jesus. And I think the harsh words of judgment when it comes to Christians are usually for one another, and not in a way that's unkind. But I mean, the harder words that we have to say need to be to one another. Yeah.
One of the protests that I think really shone the light of Christ there was one in Phoenix. Its coverage in the news didn't nearly capture the depth of thinking that went into it, but a friend, Jim Mullins, up in Phoenix, helped to organize it, actually at the prompting of a number of women in his community, I believe. But there was a biker gang, kind of NRA-related biker gang that was going to intimidate a Muslim group, and they actually protested and stood between the two groups, and they confronted their, brothers who declared to be Christians in the biker gang. They confronted them, but they confronted them in really creative and unique ways. And I think a good protest is far more creative than what we were seeing with this one.
Yeah. And
what they did was they said, so these brothers of ours, who we disagree with, they want to be heard. They are, and things like that. So they went and they listened to them. They brought them cold water to refresh them on a hot day. They stood between them and they said, if you are angry and you need to take your anger out on someone, shoot me. Use your gun against me, but not against these Muslims. And it completely diffused the situation, and everyone, even the secular media, took notice and said, wow. And the Muslims saw what Christ-likeness looked like in a far deeper way than what they were going to see with the biker gang. The biker gang guys saw Christ-likeness and encountered it and had to face that. And it had the flavor of the gospel. Like it just, and everyone could sense it. Something's different about that. And that takes a lot more gospel creativity than just to stop something from happening. Right?
Totally. Yeah. I love that. And I think that's a beautiful place for us to end. That was so good.
Yeah. Look it up. It was a really beautiful story.
I'll try to hunt down the link and put it in the notes.
There you go.
All right. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast.
Well, hey, let's end that podcast.
We got to end it. Yep, let's end it.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
And you can always email us any questions, or if there's a current event you'd really like us to talk about. I do just want to remind you all, we don't script this thing. We could come in way better prepared, but the whole point of our podcast is two pastors grappling with something or working something out together over a meal, like a mealtime conversation. And that's what you get with us. So we apologize if anything was missed. We know it was, because this is just us working it out. So thanks for sitting with us.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about AI. That was a question that was put forward.
Good.
And so we will get to it.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about doing it this time, but all this came up, and we've had some other interesting things come up that we want to talk about. But we will talk about AI. It's not going anywhere.
Awesome.
So, all right.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.